Howdy, y'all, and welcome back to the Sanctified Podcast. Today, we're going to mix things up a bit. We're going to go over two saints. Now, both could arguably be considered the first saint in their own regard, but I found both of their stories interesting, and I felt compelled to share them both here. Even though this format is a little bit different from what I normally stick with, I hope you enjoy and get something out of it today. The two saints that I'm going to cover are Saint Dismas and Saint Ulrich. But before I get into their stories, let me just cover one quick thing that I just learned recently. I kind of wish I'd learned it before, but it's that a saint is technically just somebody who is known to be in heaven. That's who we call saints. Now, it's possible that somebody is a saint, but the church doesn't know it, which is why we have a holiday called All Saints' Day, where all saints that we are both aware of and not aware of are celebrated and honored. So kind of like a throwback to an earlier episode with Saint Herman, that he very well can be a saint. He's just not recognized as one by the Roman Catholic Church yet. Now that I have that out of the way, I do want to add one other thing again, is that there are probably saints that will precede these two, but my one stipulation for today is that these are the first two normal guys to become saints. I feel it's fairly safe to say that the people who were before them, who would have been before Jesus' time, have a different sort of circumstances around them. So today I'm going to basically cover anybody who was during or after Jesus' time that could be considered the first saint. Let's start off with Saint Dismas, also known as the penitent thief. Saint Dismas was the good thief who was crucified with Jesus on Calvary. There was another thief, Justus, who was also crucified, but he did not believe in, or more specifically, he did not have faith in Jesus or God, and so he was left to die without being promised a place in heaven. Now, unfortunately, all that we really have for reference to Dismas' life comes from the Bible, and it's really just at the time of his crucifixion. Luke chapter 23, verse 32 through 43 state, "Two others also, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place which is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.' And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by, watching. But the rulers scoffed at him, saying, 'He saved others, let him save himself. If he is the Christ of God, his chosen one.' The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him vinegar and saying, 'If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself.' There was also an inscription over him, 'This is the King of the Jews.' One of the criminals who was hanged railed at him, saying, 'Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us.' But the other rebuked him, saying, 'Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation, and we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong.' And he said, 'Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingly power.' And he said to him, 'Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.'" And that's really all that we have for Saint Dismas, which is Jesus' word that he will accompany him in paradise. So I think it's fairly safe to say that Saint Dismas did wind up in heaven and is considered the first saint as such. Now, I do know that some people will argue that the Bible isn't reliable or historically accurate record to prove that this man Dismas ever even lived. Now, all that I have to say to that is that the Bible's being proven more and more every year to be the most accurate record of history from that time, as more evidence arises of the locations or of garments worn that were mentioned in it. Without getting too deep into this statement, I do want to add that there are many scholars and theologians who have attempted to disprove the Bible, but actually end up converting instead, like Lee Strobel, Gary Parker, Vico Olson, Josh McDowell, Richard Lumsden, and many more. So it's kind of interesting and lends credibility that it is a very accurate and reliable historical account. Personally, I have no reason to doubt how true and valid this story is. But if you don't believe in it, if you just think it's a fun old story, then that is absolutely okay. That's just fine. It's got a very valuable lesson nonetheless, and a great takeaway about just believing in something. There is one more story about Saint Dismas that is widely believed to be myth, but I felt it had to be included because it's a neat story if it is true, but it's not like in the Bible. It's just kind of something that got passed down and it's just kind of stood the test of time. And that story is that there were two thieves who held up Mary and Joseph as they journeyed to Egypt to escape Herod. Now, these two slaves were Dismas and Justus. Justus wanted to kill the family because he feared that they would later capture him for the crime. But Dismas bribed Justus with 40 drachma to not harm them. After this, the child Jesus said to the thieves that they would be crucified with him in Jerusalem and that Dismas would join him in heaven. Like I said, it's a fun story, but it is widely considered myth, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, I did say it, but I do want to reiterate that the reason Dismas could be considered the first saint is because he was gifted a place in paradise by Jesus, and as a result, meets the criteria for what we as Catholics recognize as a saint. I mean, it is kind of hard to beat the person that went to heaven alongside Jesus, though I'm sure there were others shortly after him. There's just not a whole lot of records of them, so we can only be aware of so many saints. There's countless saints that exist, but we only know so many because we have signs or record of them. St. Dismas' feast day is March 25th, but he doesn't have a canonization date because of the special circumstances surrounding his life and death. So he technically wasn't canonized, but he also didn't have to be canonized. Also, the whole canonization process didn't even exist at this time, which leads us into our next saint, Saint Ulrich. Saint Ulrich, or Ulrich of Augsburg, was the first person to be canonized by the Pope. As such, he's recognized as, quote, the first saint, because he is the first to have been through that process of investigations, beatification, and canonization that we went over in the first episode. Ulrich was born in Kyburg, Switzerland in 890. He was the son of a count, Count Hucbald, and as such, he was well connected with other people in royal families. He started at the monastic school of St. Gall, where he could and was reported to have been an excellent student. Later, Ulrich joined the priesthood, but had trouble deciding between being at the Benedictine Abbey of St. Gall or becoming a secular priest. He ended up going to further training with the Bishop of Augsburg, Adalbero, where he was made chamberlain. A little over a decade later, the bishop passed away, and Ulrich was appointed as the new bishop, with the help of his royal family supporting that promotion for him. As the new bishop of Augsburg, Ulrich proved to be a strong leader for the church. He improved the perception of the clergy and made sure that they steadfastly obeyed Christian law. He oversaw the construction of many churches and would regularly perform visitations. His goal was to make the blessings of his religion more obtainable and welcoming to the average citizen. He even went on 2 missions to Rome to obtain relics for his churches. His life wasn't totally unmarred from conspiracy, though. He was accused of nepotism in 972 because he appointed his nephew as coadjutor. He wished to retire from his position, and he wanted somebody to follow in his footsteps that he could trust, that he knew would stand for what he stood for. So, I mean, it's kind of obvious that the people then were like, dude, that's your nephew. You're just doing it because it's like family. Like, he may not actually be the best choice, but he did convince the people that it was a fair decision for him to make. Ulrich performed various miracles, and they were reportedly known across the Christian world in his time, which is really pretty impressive, like, given that it's just the 900s. Like, there was not an easy way to get word around back then. It was just word of mouth, people traveling and telling other people. So it's pretty impressive that his miracles spread across the Christian world so quickly. Now, these miracles include healing the sick, and he healed the limbs of lame people with the oil that he consecrated on Holy Thursday. And there were also witnesses who saw him walk on water without getting a drop on himself. It is also said that pregnant women who drank from his chalice had easy deliveries. Ulrich could sense his death approaching, and on July 4th, 973, he threw ashes on the ground in the shape of a cross, sprinkled it with holy water, and lay down upon it in prayer. He passed away not too long after this, and his body was placed in the Church of St. Afra, which is a church that he had rebuilt. July 4th is Ulrich's feast day. Ulrich was canonized a mere 20 years after his death in 993 by Pope John XV. He is the patron saint of expectant mothers, against fevers, against rodent infestations, and the patron saint of Augsburg. Another little interesting thing about St. Ulrich is that about a century after his death, there was a letter that kind of just surfaced, which was reported to have been written by him, and it opposed celibacy for those in the priesthood. Now, given his reputation for adhering strictly to Christian law, it would be interesting that he felt priests should be permitted to marry if they wanted to, because like people that knew the guy were like, no, that makes no sense. Like he would not do that. It's not really verified to actually be from him. It was just, it just kind of appeared. Somebody said it was from him, but it is currently widely believed to be a forgery. But there's no evidence one way or another of whether it's a forgery or if it was actually written by him. It just doesn't quite line up with his beliefs and what he said while he was alive. So it's probably a forgery. And with that kind of wraps up today's episode. It was a shorter one. It was just two quick stories about guys who were the first saints, in their own regard, at least. I hope you all enjoyed and maybe learned something new. It is a pretty short one, I know. There's just two very short stories about guys who could be considered the first saints in their own sort of regard. And there would have been saints technically before them because there's just obviously people who died and went to heaven before them. We just don't know. And the ones that we do know in the Bible, I would argue, have sort of extenuating circumstances around them that I don't want to include because I could argue both ways that they are normal, but they're also not normal. So I felt safe saying these two guys were just normal dudes, maybe right place, right time sort of thing for Dismas, but he still held his faith even in death. So that really vouches for his dedication. You can support the show if you liked what you heard today by subscribing, liking, commenting, feedback. I'm open to all feedback, good, bad. If you have a saint you want me to check out, you can email me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. And I appreciate your support listening to everything. And I hope you have a wonderful day.